Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's uLaw webinar. The topic for today's webinar is Law Office Client Management, and it has been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. Once again, I repeat, it's Law Office Client Management for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. And I welcome and encourage everyone to use the chat window to ask your questions regarding today's webinar topic. And my support team at uLaw would be more than happy to respond back with the answers either towards the end of the session, or I can try and introduce it during my session as well. Please to use the phone numbers provided for a better quality of the audio. If you are using the computer, we request that you mute your phone lines or mute your computer, one of the two, if you have both on. Like every other uLaw webinar, today's webinar has this very specific agenda. We focused quite a bit in our previous webinar sessions around accounting, around Law Society compliance when it comes to ledgers, journals, reconciliation. And today we wanted to focus through this particular webinar, walk you through some of the fundamental initial steps that you take as a law firm or a legal firm, and the different steps and processes that you can take to be compliant with the client intake process. So the agenda for today, of course, covers the client intake process in itself, how each and every firm may have a different way that you go about doing this client intake process, the different checklists or documents that you need to keep in mind from a compliance standpoint as you go through this client intake process, the ability for you to manage or the need for you to be able to categorize your clients, and the ease of retrieval of information. We'll talk briefly around group management and how important it is for a legal firm to be able to group their clients and the different components and categorization factors that you can have in mind as you group them. Moving along, of course, soon after the client intake process, the pieces of information that you capture, we'll talk about the importance of the conflict checks, making sure that you've done your due diligence of running the conflict check report to ensure if there are any conflicts in representing a particular client, and the process or the life cycle thereon to a non-engagement. So one of the different stages or steps that a client can take through in that life cycle of your legal firm is you do the conflict check, you recognize that there may be a conflict and you're not comfortable representing that client, then it's immediately an important step for you to create a non-engagement letter safeguarding your best interest and the interest of your client, letting them know that they should look for a different representative to represent them for this case. Yeah. We'll then look at the Law Society's requirements after you've done that client intake, such as important pieces of documents or information that they may ask you for during an audit, such as your client ID verification document, which clearly outlines specific IDs that you had looked at or scanned or have in record to ensure that this person or company that you're representing or have taken in as a client is truly who they claim to be. Some auditors do ask you for a templatization or a template to show them a typical retainer letter or an engagement letter that you use within your firm, making sure that you, as part of your obligation, have outlined and articulated as clearly as possible using those letters, a way for establishing the protocol, establishing the boundaries, the expectations from your client, as well as setting expectations of what the client should expect out of you as a service provider across that retainer letter. Okay? source of contacts. We'll briefly touch upon what the importance of that document, both from a marketing standpoint as well as from a law society standpoint, and how you capture that information right at client intake. And then we'll start looking at a few practice management aspects of your legal firm, which is how best you can import and export your client information, the types of analytics that you can drive for a specific client or for a group of clients, and how you can use that data better to serve your clients, and other means of marketing material that can be specific to either a season, such as this month of December, where you can use your envelopes as a way of marketing to your clients by sending them maybe a gift card, a season greetings, any marketing material that makes sense, a birthday wish, etc. Okay? So it's all going to be about the clients, the client intake process, and once you have that data in, how can you be setting up yourself for success, both from a compliance standpoint as well as a smart business owner standpoint, to use the information provided to make good marketing business decisions. So we'll first get started with the whole client intake process and what are the important aspects of that intake process. Now, if you have looked at any of our previous webinars, one such webinar that I have conducted in the past is that of the professional obligations that you have as a legal professional towards the law society. And one of the fundamental obligation, the starting point, if you will, is around client intake, service, and communication. So if you haven't checked out that particular webinar, it has been accredited for an hour and a half of professionalism credits, so please do check that out in our YouTube channel. But as part of the client intake process, one of the first steps that the Law Society wants you to do, of course, is take as much as information about that initial call. Let's say you are a legal firm in today's day and age, of course, where you're capturing all this information virtually. Maybe you're capturing it via phone, maybe you're capturing it through a website, and maybe there are other apps that you've invested or you've put your money into to generate leads that's sending you emails. So there's going to be many different ways that you are having that first entry point conversation with a prospective client. Maybe you schedule a quick 15-minute phone conversation or a consultation with that prospective client. Now, either during the time or soon after that consultation call, it's important before you move to the next step of really engaging and asking for that business and retaining that client to do a few steps. First and foremost, recording all that discussion, because now you have a recording of that particular conversation. Converting that, of course, into a quick conflict check to make sure that there are no conflicts, and even if there are, that you're completely aware and making an informed decision of moving forward with that retention. Once you've understood the nature of that particular client's request and the service offering that you need, it's important, of course, as a business, but it's also important as a profession for you to now go back to that particular client, either by saying, I'm very sorry, I've done my conflict check, and due to such reasons, I cannot engage you. So going forward, I'm not going to be responsible to manage this matter, and hence here's my non-engagement letter. Thank you so much. And if there's, if you've collected some money ahead, you probably want to refund that as a retainer. If no money was collected, then of course you send that non-engagement letter. If you determine that everything is fine, there's an opportunity to engage, and you are looking to ask for a retainer, clearly articulate the collateral for that fees that you're asking for, the fee structure that you've discussed. If not, then putting it in that document, setting the expectation out of that initial consultation as to what the client should expect next is a very important obligation from you as a business owner as well as a legal professional in this business. And then comes the aspect of the money. Once you've received that retainer, of course, ensuring that you've deposited that into your trust account, providing that client with the retainer receipt, making all that information available in a quick bucket so that it's easy for you to search and ascertain the different steps that you've taken. At any point in time, if you're being audited, you should be able to quickly navigate to that matter or that client and walk your auditor through everything that you've now done so far for that client life cycle. And of course, the last step is non-engagement if that's the route that it has taken, right? So we've very straightforward. There's nothing new here. But having said that, many times we find that key pieces of information during that client intake may sometimes be missed out. Okay, so this is, of course, reminding you of the best practices that you're already doing, ensuring that you're doing the right steps, and if you're not, hopefully it's a learning experience for you to incorporate moving forward these steps. From a client intake process, before we move into the retainer, what's important is that you collect, this is a private client, of course, the first name, last name, the also known name, it's a very common term, AKA, if they have one, a correspondence address if they have one at that time. Of course, each and every client matter situation is different. If you're doing legal aids, for example, or if you're working with a nonprofit, sometimes you may not have the addresses of your end client, and in which case you don't store it at that time. Storing this information, or if you have the address, you could have multiple addresses. A client may want you to send correspondence to a particular address, though they may have multiple. So it's your obligation now to the client to ensure that you mark that as the mailing address so that all correspondences have that address in mind. Okay? So that you look professional in doing that. A phone number, if they do provide you that information, email, as much as information as you can collect. One very important piece of information that would really help you and go a long way is asking that client a source of contact. So how did they get to know you as a legal professional? And we're going to look at that later on today as we walk you through the user interface of that. Now, the source of contact has become an important data entry or data point during the capturing of that client intake process. One, it gives you, the business owner, the ability to do analytics and do a scan of data to understand where really are you making or getting your clients from, which is your best source of client. Is it referral? Is it your Google marketing? Is it your, social media presence? Is it word of mouth? So that's from a standpoint of business ownership, having a great understanding of that. The other aspect of that source of contact is that it is a Law Society document. Auditors today want to make sure that you're just not a referral marketing company and you're just not, providing leads to third-party legal firms, but you are actually a legal firm yourself. And hence, understanding that source of contact and the variations in how you're getting those leads becomes an important aspect of that audit check. So if you are using a manual process to do this client intake, maybe you're capturing it by a phone, writing it down, putting it into an Excel sheet, make sure that you're capturing the source of contact. Or if you're using an accounting system or a practice management system to do so, either ask your provider to have that feature available or use the feature if it's already available. So you've done the client intake, captured these important pieces of information from name to source of contact, everything in between. And now you move on to the step of doing a conflict check, which is a very detailed process of running through your entire database of previous clients that you've dealt with, not only clients, but information of individuals that you've dealt with in other matters too, and understanding if there may be a conflict, if you have come across a very similar name, similar address that you've dealt with, to make sure that there are no inside information that you may potentially have that may make it an unfair situation for the parties involved. That's really the conflict check. Once you've done that check, determined the next step of either non-conflict or to move forward with that retainer agreement, do you come to this step, which is producing that retainer agreement specific to that client's need. And I don't want to spend too much of my time on this slide because, again, the focus is on the client, aspects of client, not so much on the retainer agreement. But a very important piece of information that you must keep in mind include the nature and scope of the matter, so that sometimes we come across where the clients say that I have no idea what I'm actually being dealt with here. I have no idea how much of money I'm going to be charged. There always seems to be this persona of a fear factor when it comes to legal matters. This is going to break that. This is going to demystify that whole fear factor and make it very evident to anyone who reads it from your legal firm's standpoint to say, hey, this is as prudent and as transparent as an agreement can be, because everything is very well outlined, making you as a legal firm look very professional, making the overall legal profession looking that much more transparent and wonderful to work with. Though the situation may not be so, the experience of working with the legal firm doesn't have to be bad, right? And it starts with a retainer agreement and a well-written one. Client responsibility. So this comes down to also including in your retainer agreement a paragraph or maybe a section that talks about client responsibilities. Either you may have a matter-to-matter situation of your days of sale. How soon do you want to get paid? Is it 30 days, 15 days, right away, 60 days? Whatever is your policy, making it clear to your client that it's their responsibility to pay you. Because this is another situation where often law firms, legal firms, may include a certain interest if payments are not made in time. Not all of them do it, but some of them just definitely do it, and it all adds up, and then we have situations where clients are not happy about that. But then the best way for you to maneuver through that situation is to take them back to the retainer agreement. And what we're starting to see these days is law firms, legal firms go through a quick Microsoft Teams or Zoom meeting to walk your client through that retainer agreement. Where in the past it was sent as an email, sent as a printed document, let them review it, come back to you with questions. These days, it's a quick session virtually that's done, walking them through each and every aspect of it, which is an improvement using technology, of course, as a conduit. Ensuring that the scheduling and course of representation, method and frequency of communication. It's never been more important than today to highlight the method and frequency of communication. So if your service level agreement is to respond back within a day, or maybe you're told your client that you would be available to them 9 to 5 at any given time, whatever comes down to how you've established that initial trust and expectation, that's then documented in this retainer agreement. Termination details. Yet another aspect of a client-legal firm relationship where there could be friction. Ensuring that you clearly have, yet again, a paragraph or a section that talks about that both you as the legal firm have the responsibility and the right to terminate a retainer or a specific agreement with this client due to these reasons. Non-payment, non-payment of retainer or top-ups, not corresponding in time. There could be many reasons that you as a firm may determine important towards that non-engagement. Likewise, empowering your client to say that if I, as the legal firm, do not fulfill these situations, or at any given time, you have the right to non-engage this firm, but here are some of the conditions that apply, right? So, for example, making sure if you've done all the work, then you are eligible to move the trust money from trust to general. If you've done all the work, then you expect the client to pay it off till that last invoice, whatever the situation may be. And after that non-engagement, or termination, clearly articulating that you then will not be, as a legal firm, responsible for that client matter from that particular date. That's very important. Okay, so, and of course the last thing, looking at the legal practitioner client confidentiality. Okay, in doing this, and this may not be something that you do right away. So typically, if you imagine a very pragmatic situation, you're not going to be generating these compliance documents as soon as you do your client intake. For all practical purposes, you may do this, if you're really extremely well disciplined, you may do this end of that week for all the clients that week. You may do it end of that month. Of course, you may do this a couple of weeks prior to you being audited. But it's important, nevertheless, to know the different documents that you're going to be asked for, the documents that you need to keep ready if during that audit you're being asked for, let's say, compliance documents when it comes to client management. So this is not accounting, this is client management, right? We spoke about this briefly. It starts with the client ID verification document for both individual private clients as well as corporations. It's often a driver's license, a passport scan copy, and you know this already. If it's a corporation, it's the corporation documents. And a client intake form that has, I would say, a record of all the information that you captured on that day of client intake. So if you're being audited 6 months after that, ensuring that you have the date and time of when that client intake happened, and as of that day. And it's important for that because of this reason of conflict check. Because when you tell your auditor, you create the conflict check and the report generated is date stamped. So as of today, this is what the conflict check says, right? So it's not as tomorrow or it's not as of a few days earlier. So that's important for you to capture the date and the information based on that date. The auditor may ask you, as I mentioned, a copy of the retainer letter, ensuring that you've provided receipts to that client, because that's another possibility of a friction. We've heard stories before, I've shouted before, or if you don't have the retainer receipt, then sometimes, you could leave a bad taste. You could have situations where you're having a conflict with your client. You don't have proof necessary to show unless it's through a electronic means of payment, especially if you've got cash retainers. Even more important to pay or send back a retainer receipt. Conflict check confirmation. So this is how you, through a document, and Law Society has provided many such important documents as templates as part of their bookkeeping guidelines across provinces, starting with LSO to British Columbia, New Brunswick, Alberta. All of our provinces in this country of Canada has given you the templates that you can use for conflict check confirmation and other Law Society documents that they expect. So there are no surprises. You don't have to come up with these documents many times. Conflict resolution. So if you determine by doing the conflict check that there is a conflict, but then you say, I've taken these steps to resolve that, or to take a resolution, and hence I'm moving forward with the retainer agreement, then appropriate documentation is important to back that up. Source of contact. And if the overall scope of work ended in a non-engagement, then the non-engagement letter. And here's a small twist to the whole thing. If this is a prospective client who came into your office or actually called your office, gave you a lot of important information such as name, address, etc., took that initial consultation and said, I'll come back to you and hopefully retain you, and then disappears, never ever shows up again. You've tried calling them many times, cannot hunt them down, they haven't come back to you after that, then it's important that you as a firm, mark that prospective client as a ghost client, true to the name of that label. Send them a non-engagement letter into, towards that last correspondence information that you have, whether it's a mailing address or an email. And that's why it's important to capture that. So safeguard your interest as well as a legal firm. Send them that non-engagement letter that says, this is what happened during the conversation. I have this information about you, but since you've not retained me or followed through after that, I'm not engaging you and hence cannot be responsible for that small claims or that criminal matter that you spoke to me about, right? So just because you spoke to me does not mean that now I am your representative. You have not retained me, and hence I'm not engaging you. And last but not the least, if you've done the work for this client, you always complete or have a logical closure to that relationship for that client and matter through a combination of a closure letter, statement of activities, bill of costs. Now, each client, each matter, the nature of the client may vary, and the different documents that supplement that closure may vary, but it's important that you have a closure letter that clearly articulates the logical end to that client legal firm relationship. And of course, a great opportunity for you to now expand on your brand, talk about other areas of practice, and welcome that client to recommend or refer you to other friends and families through that letter. Okay? If there are any questions at this time, please do use the chat window to ask us as I continue down this path of talking to you about the importance of this whole process of client intake and every document touch point that you may have with your clients. One of the aspects, of course, with that retainer agreement is the frequency and method of correspondence or communication with your client. Depending on, of course, the nature of the matter, if it's a simple, I wouldn't say simple, if the term of that engagement is short in nature, such as, for example, a speeding ticket, typically the nature of that matter is the tenure can be shorter compared to, let's say, a criminal matter or a family separation matter. So given the nature of the matter, you may have the need to send more frequent documents. So it could be a retainer letter, a retainer receipt, one invoice, a closure letter for a POA matter. Or it could be an ongoing process for a criminal matter where there's an initial retainer, a retainer receipt, of course all the documents such as client intake, retainer documents, and wait, if it's a contingency-based matter, for example, then it's important that you send them at least a quarterly review. If it's been prolonged for a period of time, just to highlight the work that has been done so far, and that's recommended, so that the client is abreast of the work that's being done, what's actually being done, and now it gives you an opportunity to continue that conversation with the client. Especially if that client matter is open, as it clearly states, right? A quarterly review of everything that's been done in that client matter. The same thing with corporate law. If you have a corporate client, depending on that retainer agreement, often we see that our clients send out at least a quarterly, if not a monthly statement of the work that's being done, especially for the open matters. Now, if this is a case that's longer than that, then the Law Society recommends that on an annual basis that you send the client a statement of accounts of both your trust and your general accounts. Okay, so again, if there's a trust account involved, such as retainers and others, then of course the ledger journal and the statement of account of both these accounts at least once a year, if it's a very prolonged matter that's ongoing. And of course, this particular webinar is being recorded and will be available to you in our YouTube channel. But a quick review of all the documents, and we've discussed this, and I'll rephrase it or reiterate it real quick. Clear and crisp invoices and receipts of both retainers, retainer agreement, retainer receipt, invoices, payments, quarterly updates for statement of activities and accounts to really walk your client through the activities such as dockets and disbursements that have occurred during that period, a bill of costs or a summary that talks about the cost of the matter thus far, right? Especially if it's a contingency matter, what's happened so far. Now, if this is a client where there's ongoing invoices and have not yet been paid for, then it's a great idea to also send along with that quarterly update your client fee book and maybe even an aging report if there are long outstanding invoices to be paid. The fee book, of course, tells your client what's been done. The aging report tells you how long it has been since that they have not paid for these invoices. A yearly update with the trust and general information in it. Probably should avoid doing that. And a final statement of activity or accounts with the closure letter. And you can either talk to a colleague or look at some of the practice management tools that have templates for these closure letters. Or you can draft one yourself, well written, that articulates the logical closure of that relationship through this final piece of work that's been done, for example. And the last line is something that we added. Of course, this is not compliance, really, but yet another personal touch from your legal firm to your clients. As we discover that referral source is still the #1 source of leads across legal firms, source of contacts across Canada, and pretty much across North America too for legal firms. It's the referral source being word of mouth, one person referring the other person within friends, families, corporations. Nothing beats that because there's a certain personal trust that's established through that relationship. And when you have a great sense of warmth and service quality that's been delivered by your firm to that client, now it's your responsibility through these little, I wouldn't call it a hard sell Harry technique, but certainly a very subtle subliminal marketing technique to have them remember you and, of course, refer you to their friends. So through a personalized card, Christmas card, it sometimes could even be a birthday card if it's prudent, depending on the relationship with the client, right? Having it branded, having your logo or some kind of a brand recognition available. And of course, uLaw has delivered another webinar, and this is not a shameless plug-in of what we've done, but just to share with you that we have done a webinar on brand management. It's called BX-CX-UX webinar, so please to look at that if you want to understand more about how best you can brand your legal firm. So much for compliance. So we've taken the past 30 minutes to walk you through the client intake process, the different compliance documents, right from client intake to closure letter. Now, another aspect of the whole client intake, client management process is the amount of time that a legal firm takes in being able to retrieve client information, categorize client information, and use that client information to make better business decisions. And one of the first steps is to be able to use the right tools and techniques to categorize clients. If you're using a manual system, making sure that you have the right manila folders that can categorize or classify based on areas of practice that you have clients for. So you may be serving family law, criminal, real estate. So if you're doing this manually, having a manila folder that has, criminal written on top of it, and then all your client information filed well under that. If you're using Excel sheets and Word documents, you can use your Windows folders, your MacBook as folders, and have documents sorted under that. Or if you're using practice management tools, of course, they give you the ability to categorize clients as well and to group them based on various things or tags that are relevant to your business. You're also able to, a good idea or a suggestion is also to manage these clients or contacts based on the party types. So you have various different contacts that come across in your legal matters depending on the nature of it. So you could have a plaintiff-dependent situation, an applicant-respondent situation. Criminal matters may have other types of parties involved, like health practitioners, the police officer, etc. So grouping contact and client information based on the type of party type that they are also sometimes helps to make it easier on you. So if you're working with a matter and let's say you've already come across this legal practitioner who's your opponent, throwing them that information one time, and let's say the next matter comes along and you find out that it's that same legal representative who's your opponent, let's say for this matter too, then it's easier for you to retrieve and utilize that information, right? And of course, that's everything to do with clients' information, managing ghost clients, the opposing counsels, as I mentioned. You can also manage source of referrals. So maybe you could say, so far I've got, of course, certain practice management tools gives you as part of that source of contact report. But if you're doing this manually, then it's important for you to keep in mind that sometimes having that source of referral as a group also helps. So you could say word of mouth as a group and saying I've got 34 clients out of word of mouth. I could have social media marketing as a group and say I have 26 clients through that effort. So that's another angle how you can utilize group management if you're not already doing that. Okay? Now for 2 more slides before we take the next 15-20 minutes to walk you through utilizing uLaw as an example as to how you can go about doing these different documents, how you can capture data, everything else. But one of the questions that we were asked before generating this presentation and slide is, as part of that conflict search or conflict check, what pieces of information do we need to capture and articulate to the Law Society to ensure that they're comfortable with our judgment that there is no conflict? What's that document? So the Law Society of Ontario and other provinces have created this template called the Conflict Check Report. So it's available to you. It's called the, I believe, the Contact Conflict Screening Form. And you can Google it. This is an editable PDF document. You can create your own PDF version of it. This particular form gives you a guideline for the types of questions that you may want to ask yourself as you intake a client to ensure that there is no conflict in representing them, or gives you a means to communicate to the Law Society that this is what I did during this client intake process, and this is why I determined that there is or there isn't a conflict, and what my next steps are based on that decision. And for that, it's important, as I mentioned earlier, to have the data available, because you can't do this conflict search without those important pieces of information. Starting with, of course, the first name, last name, sometimes even the AKA name, the address, if you have one, sometimes helps. And once you've got that basic piece of information, it's important for you to articulate, especially if it's a growing legal firm and you have multiple individuals involved. One of the steps to capture is who within your organization has done that client intake. Okay? And when you did that conflict search, for example, when was it done? Which date? What were the results of that conflict search? And if you did find that there was a conflict and you still want to take the resolution, as we mentioned, what steps are you taking? Did you get a client ID for that particular client? Did you get a driver's license, passport to really determine that the name and address matched? And if for whatever reason, if you have declined a retainer, and ensuring that you mark that in that document. So we're going to look at this document in a second, but I just thought I will quickly give you or set up the expectation of what this conflict screening form is all about. Okay? And last but not the least, as I mentioned, analytics. As you capture information about your clients, you're also invariably capturing a certain data analytics behind the scene. You're capturing a certain pattern of client and client information that's specific to your firm. And you're capturing a certain subliminal nature of work delivered and the types of clients that you're dealing with and the types of transactions, the types of days of sale. There's a lot of data that you can use to learn from mistakes, to be understanding the best practices that you're taking and how that's reflecting your business, and the right steps to take to keep your client happy and compliant, as well as ensuring that your business is profitable. It all comes from the data that you're entering and capturing as part of the day-to-day life of your legal business. Important analytics. So if there's a certain type of area of practice, or sometimes a certain type of client, could be based on areas of practice, it could be based on the source of contact. So for example, if the source of contact is a personal referral, you can draw parallels to see if the data is there, and legal accounting practice management tools can give you this to say, you can be rest assured that your fees would be paid on time if the source of contact is a personal referral. Or let's put it this way, the chances, the probability of your fees being paid on time in full is higher if your source of contact was a personal referral. So you may already know this in your mind, but do you have the data to prove it to you is the question. And if you have the data to prove that, then it's science. It's not an expectation. It's not just an assumption. Now you can be confident based on data, and hence you can now mobilize the effort, time, money towards improving that word-of-mouth reference. Because you know, if the word of mouth is what's working to bring clients in, and on top of that, you know that the days of sales are reduced and you're getting the full amount from those types of clients, that's a very qualified client. And those are the types of clients maybe you should think about acquiring, right? Sometimes you don't want to go down a rabbit hole with certain types of clients who may not necessarily pay you on time. There's problematic, and it's taking your precious time from possibly doing quality work for the right type of client who would pay you on time. Unless you capture this data, unless you process this data, it's not going to return the information you need. And hence, the first step, and I will not beat this beyond this, the first step for many of you who have joined, hopefully, is to have a system. Once again, I repeat, does not have to be, the idea is not to sell you a product, the idea is to sell you a concept. And if the tools and products help you accomplish that, then that's great. But you are completely in control of the types of tools, techniques that you need to finally execute that concept. The concept being capture data as and when it happens, as soon as it happens, and then use that data as proof to make scientific decisions and not assumptions about the hygiene of your business and what's affecting that hygiene of your business, and how moving forward 2021 you can be prepared to be successful, you can be prepared to be compliant, and very well prepared and available for a very satisfactory service delivery to your clients. So it's a kind of a vicious cycle, is it not? To be able to provide top-notch quality, that's going to make your clients happy, and that's going to help them refer you, and then it's a cycle. So ending with the analytics, or ending with processing the data that you have regarding a client, is very important. Of course, leaving some of the other hats that you as a legal practitioner needs to wear around ledgers, journals. We're not going to talk about that today. This is everything to do with key pieces of client information outside of the accounting principles. Of course, you have the benefits of a practice management software, legal accounting software in today's day and age. Once again, I've mentioned this for several years now. The advancements in the legal tech is not stopping. And hence, as a legal practitioner, you have quite a few options to explore, quite a few software tools and techniques to adapt to help you not only automate many of these tasks so that that does not take away your time, but to infuse best practices to provide, as I mentioned, a very compliant, successful, and client-focused service delivery. So with another 10 to 12 minutes remaining in our clock, because I want to be on time and ensure that I respect your time and availability, I'm going to shift gears into my practice account using Roger Moore as the legal practitioner who is using uLaw as an example. Again, for purposes of time, I've gone ahead and created a client. I've created a matter. I've done some work with this client. But just to give you an example, one of the first steps that you would do as a legal firm is to capture information about a client. So you do so by clicking the Add New Contact Clients, and this is where you're capturing a lot of the information. So for example, you could say WW, maybe that's the AKA name. We even have a birth date. We have a source of contact, which is a community referral in this matter. A correspondence address, so you could see the correspondence address was not well marked. Now you made that change. Phone number, email, website information. This is the first step. This could be you capturing similar information on a piece of paper, Excel sheet, Word document, or in a system. First step, capturing the client intake. Of course, we're making a lot of changes to the platform to connect with websites. So if there's a contact us page. We're able to bring that information to your email and then confirm it right away into the system. So practice management tools, including uLaw, are finding easier ways for you as a legal firm to intake those clients. And let's see you've done that. Automatically, you can see that that client is grouped under the clients group, and you would see that under the clients group as well. If, let's say, Willy Wonka, you can create your own groups, and let's say this is a Wilson Estate client or matter, you can create that as a group and add Willy Wonka, for example, add him to that group as well. So if you want to add Willy Wonka to, let's say, a web leads group, showing that this person came through a web lead, that gives you a little bit more information. It came through a web, but the fundamental source of contact was through a referral. So that's what you would take out of that. Okay, so maybe the correspondence method was web, but the actual referral came through a community referral, because that you realize after you've spoken to them. Now the first step is, of course, doing that conflict check. So you can, of course, check if you've ever done an employment screening matters, if you've ever created dockets for this particular client. This is the first step once you've done that client intake process. You can see there's also a client ID verification document, which is a Law Society document, and this template is available to you on the Law Society's website, which we have templatized as a document. All it does is it pre-populates all the information so that you don't have to repeat it. But if you're not using a system such as uLaw, you are able to download this and make this available, and then you would, of course, have to fill out this information for each client. The name, the address, and this is where you can pretty much mark what information that you received to identify that this was truly Willy Wonka. So maybe you got his driver's license, when did you do that, and who did it. So you can clearly see it was Roger Moore. If there's anyone else in your firm who did this, of course, this is an editable document. Okay? The source of contact report. Let me go to the compliance, and you can see that, and for the month of, let me just for the whole year, make it interesting. Let's say you want to understand over this past year, and here is the conflicts report, which clearly says that there is no conflict, there are no names, and this is date stamped as of 4th of December. So you take that document, and here is the source of contact, which clearly states, alrighty, over this year, and if this was true, about 19% of the clients came through family referral. Another 17 came through other referrals. About 18% came from others. 12% came from friends. So this gives you a good pie chart of the different various categories through which you've got your clients. Okay? And for those who have not been categorized, maybe you didn't have that information then, you have that information to act upon later as well. So you've done the conflict checks. Maybe you've determined that there's no conflict. You go ahead and create a matter. So now you've done, at a preliminary stage, the client intake, the conflict check, and the client ID verification document all ready to go. Now you've created a matter, and just for purposes of time, I've already created a matter. I've done a retainer, or actually there's no retainer in this case. It was just work done, dockets, and disbursements, as you can see. had a flat rate fee of $678 plus another $200 disbursement. And if I go into my Matter Analytics, it tells me that I've actually got paid on time, which is fantastic. Now I can pretty much do all of my compliance documents, as I mentioned, either end of the week, end of the month, or maybe before audit, which clearly tells me, did I do the client ID verification? What was the client intake form? Conflict screening report, the retainer letters. And uLaw either allows you, for example, to store these documents in your local computer, or if you connect it through any of the third-party cloud storage systems that we connect with, whether it's Google Drive or otherwise, you can pretty much drag and drop all that information here. Okay, so we create a folder in Google Drive for you. You can create subfolders if you like, client intake, closure documents, invoices, and once the information is available, you can just go ahead and start to generate those documents. So let me drag and drop the client intake into my client intake folder. You can see here's the driver's license, and then I've got the client ID verification. It's as simple as that. Generate the documents, upload it into any file repository system that you like, and review it, of course. And this is where you're being happy about being compliant through that client process. Okay? Maybe if it's a non-engagement, you have the non-engagement letter, quarterly statements for bill of cost, settlement statements, summary, and let's say we've done this matter, this work is done, let's generate a closing letter. And I'll put that in my closure documents. So you can have 3 folders or more. Here's an example of a matter file closing letter. And when it's time for audit, you can pretty much be, and let's say you finished this matter, you moved on to the next matter, and you may be working on several hundred matters that year, especially if you've started this first thing in the year, and you're now being audited. If you've done the due diligence to generate these documents and make it available, great. If not, you can do it just before the audit, connect it with your folders, and make it readily available. You can group them under folders if you like. If I go into my client intake folder, and the auditor asks you, all right, can you please show me your intake form? You can say, no worries. Here's my client intake form. And then open it right from here. Okay? The driver's license. You can say I've scanned the driver's license. So there's many different types of formats of documents that, of course, you can store in the cloud. That's definitely not Mr. Willy Wonka, nevertheless. That's the aspect of the compliance. Now comes the important aspect of how can I use this data to understand this client and the type of client that this is. So if I go into my matter, and then let's say I actually do a quick compliance. I'm going to do a much better document. So I can do this client level analytics document, which gives me various types of pieces of information that I could use specific to clients. And of course, you have that across various different types of compliance aspects as well as the nature of the business. So you have client file-based analytics and accounting analytics, and Law Society compliance analytics. So you could see, click of a button, how compliant you are with Law Society's requirements at any given point in time. And you can also do the contacts analytics summary that tells you how much of information you've captured about a client. And the same information is available to you right on your phone across many systems, including uLaw. So you can see right away the number one category of your client source is client referral. This is all the information that you need about your clients. That's the total number of clients that have not been categorized, which is not great. And this is for the whole year. Client referral being the number one, you have 73 clients from that. Advertisement is the number 2 category. Total clients, that's the total clients for this particular date range. And you have birthdays. So for the month of December, you could see that Jonathan Form has a birthday celebrating his 44th birthday on December 6th. And you've got Willy Wonka celebrating his 19th birthday on December 7th. There's the two. Again, what you and your firm does with that information is all very specific to your firm. But as I mentioned, if that helps, you can go ahead and maybe send them a birthday card thanking them for their business, that you remember them for the wonderful client that they were. Other types of analytics could be where you're looking for feedback chart with clients. And you're trying to understand who were my top paying clients this year. You can even further go into understanding who are my pro bono clients. So if you've been providing pro bono to matters and clients, understanding that as well. So you can see right away we do a quick pie chart. You've got Johnny Doe at about $1,000. You've got Jack Schroff at about, you've got Henry Knight at about $17,000 revenue, almost 10% of your overall revenue. If you want to understand your pro bono charts by clients, all of this is information that you've stored. But if you can store it in a manner that makes it easier for you to make information decisions that's more compliant as well as helps your business, then nothing like it. So you've got 2 clients this quarter, Mr. Garfield Silvers and Mr. Way Lighthouse, who have 62% and 37% of your overall pro bono, right? You can clearly state that. So to wrap up today's CPD webinar, the topic, once again, is about law office client management. So we looked at, from an agenda perspective, the importance of the client intake process and all the Law Society's documents that supplement that whole process, the importance of the retainer agreements and every touchpoint document client-facing that's important for you to articulate responsibilities and expectations on that relationship. We looked at how information about clients can help you as a business make informed decision about acquiring the right type of clients for your business. And last but not the least, using data such as birthdays, seasonal greetings as a means for you to stay in touch with your clients, to ask for referral business is, of course, a very important step for the growth of your business as well. Please do use your corresponding Law Society portals and use the title Law Office Client Management as the title for this 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits accredited in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. And I thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. It is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel as early as next week.